Hello students, it's Dr. Yu. In this lecture, we're going to talk about business writing, specifically letters. Now, when we talk about letters, here's what we're going to talk about. We're first going to look at what are business letters and what are they for? And what about email? And what about memos? So we'll talk about those. Then we'll talk about how do I write routine letters. Routine letters are going to be letters that are sort of neutral, along with good newsletters as well. And then you're also going to learn how to write unfavorable letters. What if you have to write a letter that's going to deliver bad news? How do we do that well in writing? So let's get to it. First, what is a business letter? There are several purposes of a business letter. The first is external communication. Anytime you're communicating with somebody outside of your organization, whether it's with a possible customer, or somebody who is a member of your supply chain, or somebody who is a community leader, you're going to probably want to use a letter. A letter is a much more formal and also personal way to connect with somebody because you're putting in the money and the printing costs and the mailing costs of sending this to somebody. So when you send somebody a letter, it's a big deal. But it's also meant to be a personal connection as well. So when I write a letter to someone and I send it out and I print it, I'm going to make it more personalized to them because it's going to feel like I am writing this to them. I'm speaking to them as an individual to an individual. And in fact, I'll even sign the letter to make it to even give more of a personal connection to that person or to the reader. And it's also used for special business. There's several types of jobs that rely heavily on business letters. People in sales have to send out sales letters and also try to expand business with current clients. People in the supply chain might write letters to suppliers to make claims or to extend credit or to deny credit. So there's all kinds of contexts where business letters are really used a lot to do daily operations. Now, this brings up the question of, well, what's the difference between a memo versus a letter versus an email? So let's try to create some separation here. So a memo is generally informative. Their parties are going to be internal. It's going to be people within the organization. It's going to have more of an impersonal tone because a lot of times it's a one-to-all type communication where you're one person making an announcement to a lot of people. Memos are supposed to be short, to the point. Your typical blot is going to be nice there, bottom line on top. And you don't generally sign memos. Now, sometimes you'll see people initial like their name. If it's from a specific person, you might see their initials by their name, but you don't generally have a signature block where you sign off on the memo. A letter can be informative or persuasive. I can send a letter to an external party to inform them of something, to let them know that we extended their credit or whatever, or to also persuade them to do something, a sales letter. Now, we of course want it to be it's going to be external. Now, there are exceptions to this. So there might be a time when you would send a letter to somebody within your organization. For example, if you want to commend somebody for doing something and you want to make it seem like a bigger deal, you might use a letter actually for that. So there's always going to be some exceptions here. Or, And then letters are going to be a little bit longer, probably. Not pages and pages, but you just might spend 4 paragraphs as opposed to just 2 or 3 on a memo. And you always sign a letter. That's one of the critical things that makes a letter, is that there's going to be a signature block and your wet signature will be on it, or a copy of your wet signature will be on it. And then email is amorphous because an email can do the work of a memo and the email can also do the work of a letter. So email is one of these things, it's very amorphous. It can do both. So that's why people ask, do people still write letters? Well, yes, but maybe not as much as emailing so much, but each of these 3 genres still have usages. And then email is even more amorphous because email, not only can email replace or do what the work of a memo can do, and also the work of a letter. You can send a sales email or you can send a sales commendation and so forth. Email can also replace interpersonal communication too at times. Instead of walking down the hall and saying, hey, John, you going to lunch at 2? You can send John an email. Hey, John, you going to lunch at 2? And then it serves as that interpersonal interaction as well. So email is just super amorphous in that regard. Now, here's an example of a letter that I just made up from scratch here. So you'll notice that a letter has, from a formatting standpoint, several things. First, it has a letterhead at the top, and the letterhead's going to have the company and the address and the contact information. So having a letterhead's important because we have to know where the letter's coming from. And then you don't have to add this other address at the top because it's all up here. Secondly, a letter is always dated, so it has a date. It has an inside address. The inside address is going to be who the letter is addressed to. Now, things get interesting. What if you're writing a letter to a multinational corporation with multiple addresses and such? A letter should be personalized to an individual, so just go to that individual's location. If you can't do that, I would probably just do the headquarters because, in some way they're connected to that. Then you have the salutation. So it's going to be Dear Mr. Vasquez or whoever, and it's going to be pretty formal in its salutation. So dear, and then their name and a colon. Now, if you want to make it more personal, or less formal, so it's kind of like a less formal letter, you could do dear Mark, comma. That would be acceptable for a less formal situation. So it just depends on what degree of formality you want to convey. The other thing too about salutations. So what if you don't know who the letter is supposed to go to? You don't know the name of the person, but you're writing a letter to this company. So it's like a hierarchy of preference. Number one, and always number one, will be to write a letter to an individual. So finding out who this letter should be addressed to should be mission critical when you're trying to figure out when you're addressing a letter. But let's just say for some reason, you just cannot find the name of a person who this letter would go to, but you got to send this letter to this company. So then the second best option is to address it to a title. So if I don't know who the manager is for some reason, and I can't find out for some reason, you should do the work to find out because that's critical to a good letter, then say Dear Manager, then manager up here, because then at least you know that you're thinking of a title. Now, if for some reason, I don't know, maybe you're doing an employment cover letter where you don't even have that information, which that would be strange if you didn't. But let's just say if you didn't, for some reason, you just can't find a name and a title, then go to the third level, which is the company. So in that case, this would be Sunlight Solar 890, and then you'd say, Dear Sunlight Solar, and then continue on with your letter. So either name, title, company. You want all three, but if you can't get access to number one, then number two. If you don't have access to number two, then go to the third level, company. Then you have the body of the letter, and that's where all the text and the action happens, and we'll talk about strategy for writing body. Then you have your complimentary close. I like sincerely. Sincerely is good. And then your signature block. Your signature block will have space. This is usually 4 spaces right here, 4 blank spaces to allow for you to sign it, and then also include your name and title at the bottom. You don't need to put your address and all that stuff if you're using a letterhead that's specifically to your name and title and such, and your address and phone number and everything. Okay, so those are the parts of a cover letter. Now, as far as actually writing the letter, there are 2 approaches to writing business letters. One's going to be familiar to you potentially if you watch the memo, and the other one's going to be new. The first is called the deductive approach. In the deductive approach, here's what happens. First, you have your thesis / takeaway. So whatever the point is, you put that at the beginning of the letter. Here's the point. Here's the news. Here's what we want you to do. Then you have your details and explanation. So you've given the thesis now. Now you provide any details or explain anything that you need to explain to contextualize or justify whatever thesis or takeaway that you're giving. And then you do a forward close. Close on what the next steps are, or close on looking forward to working with you, closing on something that respects the relationship. So here's the idea. Letters are supposed to be personal in nature, so you're recognizing that you have a relationship with the reader. The letter should convey that you care about this relationship and this future with this person, so a forward close should have that nice little touch to it to convey that, yeah, you're important to me, and so forth. This is in contrast to the other approach, which is called the inductive approach, but I'll talk about when to use which. In the inductive approach, you start with a neutral opening. The neutral opening will signal what the topic is, but it won't necessarily give away the thesis. Then, it's going to provide details and explanation that'll lead up to a specific thesis or takeaway. And then once you've stated the thesis or takeaway, you're going to close out. So here, the reader is going to know the news right away, and they get the takeaway. If they don't read anything else, it's all good because they got the thesis or takeaway. You don't really care if they read the details and explanation as much. I mean, it's probably going to be important. But if you had to choose, as long as they see paragraph 1 and they don't get any of the rest, that's fine. Here, you're forcing the reader to have to go through this before you get to here. Now, there's going to be times when this is exactly what you want. You want the reader to have to read the details and explanation before they get to the thesis. And I'll explain that next. So first, here's an example of a deductive letter. So if you pause the video and look at it, you can read it. But if not, I'll just speed through it real fast. So notice here we start with the thesis. Dear Mr. Vasquez, we will ship the revised source code with the proper in-program documentation to you within 3 weeks. So there was a problem with the source code that was sent to this person, to Mr. Vasquez. So Andy Atkins, starting off the thesis, here we heard your complaint, here it is, we will get you new source code. Then in the explanation, thank you for bringing the situation to our attention. Although we subjected your program to normal operating quality control review, we omitted something. Okay, so here's the thesis. We're sending you new source code, explanation. Sorry about that. Here's what happened. And then forward close. Please call us at 555 if your application programmers would like to spend a few hours touring our facilities, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so forward close. Deductive. Point at the top, explanation as needed, forward close. See you next time. Here's an example of an inductive letter. So if you pause the video, you can read the whole thing. If not, I will just speed through it. So first, it starts with, I commend you for your commitment to restore College Station's historical botanical gardens. In this age of internet, movies, television, and quarantine, the city needs new ways to appreciate nature's beauty. The context of this letter is somebody emailed Miss Vicky Baylor here, asked Andy Atkins if he would donate some materials for a botanical gardens project that's being done in College Station. This is completely fake, by the way. Okay, so starts off with a neutral opening, maybe with a little bit of positive goodwill. You build some goodwill with the reader. Then there's an explanation about the success of the project does depend on donations and large amounts of material are needed. But we significantly reduced our inventory this year because of the pandemic. And then there's a thesis offered. Although we cannot offer any donated materials at this time, we do want to support your worthy project. Why would they do that? Because Andy wants Miss Vicky to read the opening and explanation before she sees the thesis to understand it. Then a forward closing is given. Laura's Floral, our sister company in Houston, can help you. Blah, blah, blah. Call her. Great. So that's an inductive use or an inductive letter. Both of these have usages. So it's not like deductive is always good and inductive is always bad. It depends on the circumstances that you're in. So that begs the question, when do I use which? So here are my general guidelines, and then I'm going to talk about exceptions in the next slide. As a general guideline, here's what I recommend. There are 3 types of letters you're going to send, generally. First, you have goodwill letters. Goodwill letters are things like job offers or offering something to somebody, apologies, acceptances, thank yous, appreciations. What makes goodwill letters is that their impact on the reader is the reader's going to smile. The reader's going to be happy. It's favorable to the reader. The reader will like what they read. They'll enjoy it. It'll bring happiness to their lives, okay? We love goodwill letters. Goodwill letters make people happy. Then you have neutral or routine letters. These are your letters that you use to conduct daily business. They're not good necessarily. They're not happy, joy type letters, but they're also not sad letters. They're just routine business, claim adjustments, favorable replies to requests, acknowledging somebody's order, answering a question somebody has that was formally posed. So these are neutral letters, okay? And this might be most of your workday is neutral/routine context letters. But then you have a third type of letter you might send, and these are your unfavorable letters. These are letters that won't be favorable to your reader. They're going to be sad to your reader. Your reader might be upset having to read it, might hurt their feelings, might be hard. It's not fun. So denying a claim, refusing a request, refusing an order, rejecting a candidate, all of these things are unfavorable letters, but you might have to write them because you're not going to say yes to everything and you're not going to hire everyone who applies. So this is part and parcel of being in charge. Now, okay, so which ones do I use inductive and which ones do I use deductive? Recommendation is this. For neutral, routine, and goodwill letters, you're okay just doing deductive. Start with the good news on top, or start with the whatever the action is on top, give the explanation as needed, and close it out. But when you're giving bad news, I recommend the inductive approach, because you want the reader to not, if you put the bad news at top, the reader's going to want to argue with whatever it is that you just said. So you want to give yourself a chance and give the reader a chance to read the reasoning, so they're more likely to accept the bad news. So let's start with routine messages, and then we'll talk about bad news messages after that. So here's a routine claim acceptance. So a routine claim acceptance, you can see here, first you have the news. Okay, so somebody made a claim about the documentation. So here's the news. We will ship the revised source code. So we saw this one before. Then provide details or explanation. So we're explaining what happened real fast. We didn't go into a lot of detail, but just enough here to say, here's what happened. And then forward close. Routine claim acceptance. It's short. Notice also not graphic highlighting, but speed reading. Less than 5 lines per paragraph. So really easy to speed read. And that's what we want in business writing. We want things to be speed readable. We want to get our point across fast and quickly. Or how about a routine request? Now, this is a request for information. So Andy Atkins is writing Mr. Mark Vasquez here. So notice here, state the request. Dear Mr. Vasquez, can you please provide some additional information about my first overseas assignment? And then, quick explanation. I want to know because I'm trying to transfer to environmental group in Paris. I know you've worked in this group for several years. Okay, so I'm asking, my request is coming first, and then I'm giving a reason why, because usually that's the first question when you make a request. Why do you want it? Well, you're making it known really fast. Then, in this case, this person wants specific information. So then I would prompt what exactly you want to know in parts. And notice here you have graphic highlighting. The questions are put in bullet point form, which then allow the reader of this letter to quickly parse what they need to answer and their response. And then you have a forward close. So the forward close ends positive. I look forward to anything you can provide, and also kind of gives a deadline too for when they need a response in a nice way. So that way Mr. Vasquez doesn't take too long in responding, and that's good. That's a routine request. State the request, provide the explanation, provide any prompts, close it out. Here's a goodwill letter, appreciation letter. So here Andy Atkins is writing to Ms. Mary Vasquez from the Human Resources Department. Thank you so much for your untiring efforts to initiate a child care reimbursement plan at Snyder & Company. Great. Statement of praise. Bottom line on top. Okay? Give the thesis right away so we know what exactly is going on. Explain why. So because of your commitment, the company's policy is now in effect. I face difficulty finding affordable and adequate care for my child. This reimbursement program you started relieves a major financial burden from all of us. Okay? So it gives us the why. Why is this a big deal? Then just a quick forward close. Thank you for your significant contributions as our rep. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? Close it out. There we go. Appreciation letter. Not too long to write. You should send a lot of these to your employees because employees greatly appreciate these things. So in general, when you're doing good news or goodwill letters, it's the same format. State the pleasant news, provide the details, forward close. Thank you. State the gratitude cause, provide reasons for the appreciation, encourage the continued behavior, close it out. Apology letters. Let's say you have to write an apology. State the apology. Sorry for doing X, Y, and Z. Detail the corrective actions. And maybe give a quick explanation too. Sorry for X, Y, and Z. We overlooked that and that's our fault. Detail corrective actions. In the future, we will make sure to do X, Y, and Z, or to do A, B, and C, and you'll see those things happen immediately. And then affirm the relationship in the future. We hope to continue doing business with you, or we look forward to continuing doing business with you, and we thank you for helping us become a better company. Something like that. Okay, great. So you apologized, still same idea. Routine messages, same idea. State the main idea. Provide details. Restate the idea, forward close. So in a claim, request the action. Provide details so the person knows what exactly they need to do to get this action done. And then remind them of the action and forward close. A positive response. So somebody asks you for something. Okay, great. Top part, say yes. State your acceptance. Part 2, provide any details that you need to provide once you provide the response. Dear John, yes, I approve of you taking 2 weeks of vacation from November 1st to November 15th. Please make sure you let HR know that blah, 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 that you have a shift, blah, 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 blah. Okay, great. We hope you have a good time on your vacation, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. So state the acceptance, provide details, close it. So that's routine and goodwill letters. Now, how do I write unfavorable messages? What if I have to write an unfavorable letter? Okay, so let's do some detail on that. There are generally 4 parts to bad news when you're doing it in writing. First, you're going to have the introduction. In the introduction, you want to signal that the topic of the letter. You're not going to give away the news, but you're going to signal the topic. You're going to build goodwill. You're going to maybe say something that's positive about the person and establish that you care about this person, or at the very least that you're not out to be against this person. You're not against the person. Okay, they're not your enemy. You're not an enemy to them. And then what you want to do is transition to reasoning. Then you want to provide an explanation. So discuss the reasons that were going to lead up to the news. And also try to show that you really thought about what the reader said, or you really thought about the reader's interests. And try to frame it as, we considered what you said, and exactly right, blah, 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 but blah, 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 blah. And then you have your actual bad news statement, and then you'll state the news. And if you can use some accentuation techniques, that really helps. And I'll explain what some of those accentuation techniques are later. And then lastly, close it out. You can demonstrate empathy, you can unify the message, bring it all whole, but try to end it positively without sounding trite. So let's go into detail on how that would look. So first, here's a bad example. So you can read this and pause the video. Okay, so after having paused the video, or at least taken a second to read it, let's go through it. So first, this is a deductive bad news letter. Now, we'll talk about in a second some exceptions to when you should go inductive versus deductive, but probably not the best place to be deductive when somebody's asking for a request for a donation. And apologizes. We don't really want to, when we have to make a business decision, we don't want to apologize for making the decision, right? The decision is right, so we shouldn't have to say sorry for that. Now, we'll still have to convey empathy and such, but we should not apologize because that creates doubt about the decision. In the second paragraph, there's a lot of focus on myself and what I think and what I feel. And then you have issues like, as you've seen on news and elsewhere, many other businesses are suffering. I'm sure your business has experienced difficulties too. So it tries to not be on the self, but then it says, in my opinion, this may not be the best time to launch a botanical garden project. Perhaps you should wait until the pandemic is over. So now it's condescending. All the person asked for was donations. They didn't ask for your advice about when and if to do a botanical garden. So now you're just kind of putting salt on the wound after saying no to them by telling them that they're wrong for all these other things. You don't want to do that in bad news. And then some kind of thoughtless closer. I wish you the best of luck on your project. Clearly you don't if you just said no to it. But these are the kinds of things people try to do to sound positive. So you got to be more thoughtful than that. Now here's a better example. So same issue, asking for a donation. So go ahead and pause the video and read this real fast. Okay, so it starts off with a neutral opening. I commend you for your commitment to restore College Station's historical botanical gardens in this age of internet, movies, and quarantine. Okay, so it acknowledges that, hey, I know that what you're doing here is good, and I commend you for that. Great. Now you transition to the reasoning. You and I agree that the success of your project depends on the support of business donations, clearly because they asked. Large amounts of materials and labor are needed. We agree. During the pandemic, we reduced our inventory to offset the lost business that we incur with the stay-at-home orders. So, okay, now we've kind of given an explanation, okay? We don't have the inventory. Although we cannot offer any donated materials at this time, we do want to support your worthy project. So here we have the news. We cannot offer any donated materials at this time. We do want to support your worthy project, though. In this case, if this is possible, if you have to deliver bad news, you can soften the blow if you can also offer a counterproposal. So a counterproposal would be, I can't do X, but I could do Y, or I can direct you to Y. Because here's the thing, when you just say no, no, it's like a brick wall on the person. If you can say, instead of no, go this way. No, but go this way. Now you're redirecting the person. You're not brick walling them. You're just directing them. You're redirecting them to another place where they can achieve their goals. So offer a counterproposal. In this case, calling their sister company, and then shift to the forward close. In this case, call their general manager. Perhaps she can help you, and she's in a better position to, and here's her number. Okay, see you later. That's how you deliver bad news. Now, there are exceptions, though, in terms of when you should use inductive for bad news. So these are the exceptions. Number one, if it turns out that this is a second time somebody is asking for something. So let's say the donations were requested the first time. You sent them this inductive letter, but for some reason, the person is persisting. Like they ask again. They just didn't get the point, or for some reason they didn't read the letter, whatever it is. Okay, they just want to persist and ask again. On a second rejection, you should then use deductive, because now you've given them a chance. Now you've did it nicely. So deductive, you just want to say, unfortunately, we still cannot do that, blah, 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 or just say we still cannot do that. Give an explanation, as we stated before, blah, 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 but please call these other people, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so second rejection, definitely go deductive. If you think the matter is insignificant, so you're giving bad news, but you don't think it's that big of a deal to the reader. Now, it's not insignificant to you, it's insignificant to your reader. So you're always thinking about your reader when you write a letter. What effect is this going to have on my reader? If you think it's a small matter that just isn't going to affect them in a way that's going to be hurtful or anything like that, you can probably still go deductive. So in that case, do so. Also, if you think the relationship is stable enough to where you saying no won't affect the relationship at all, because perhaps you just, this happens a lot where they ask for something and they say no and it's never been a big deal. And maybe they say no to you on some things and it's no big deal. You just have that kind of relationship where people can take the no without feeling like you have to really protect the relationship. Okay, great. I know, like in the military, like I have a military student who was like, in the military, we would still do deductive bad news. Right, because in the military, they do a good job of teaching you not to take things personally. So yes, you can totally do it that way. So if you're in a context where you think relationships are stable, people won't take it personally, they won't be hurt by it, then I think you can go by deductive. But if the request is outrageous, also, if that request is illegal or it's immoral or it's just something far left field, you don't need to do an inductive letter for that. You can just outright reject it. I would in fact encourage you, especially if it's illegal, definitely do deductive, because you don't want to even seem like you even gave it a second's thought of doing whatever it is they requested. And then lastly, if you want to demonstrate authority on something, so somebody asks something that you just can't believe they would even bother asking, or like you want to set a tone that like this is not even something worth asking, you can also do deductive there. So those should be very serious situations where you would do something like that. So here's another example. So here's an example of another bad news letter. So here we start off with, Dear Miss Baylor, the items in your order from May 6th have been selling very rapidly in recent weeks. We can see that you're excelling at meeting your customers' growing demands for the latest in mobile phone and tablet technology. Now, just some quick context here. This is a request for a credit increase. So Miss Baylor asks for a credit increase for her company, and Atkins is going to have to say no. Okay, so first we have the introduction. So in the introduction, you're going to signal the topic, establish goodwill, and transition to the reason. So here we have the items listed in your order from May 6th have been selling very rapidly. So you can see that we're agreeing with her. We're acknowledging that, yes, her company is growing and she's trying to meet her customers' demands. So you can see here, we have a point of agreement. It's okay to start off with a little point of agreement just to show that you read or considered whatever it is that they asked. And that shows that you're not trying to debate them. You're not trying to be their enemy. You're not trying to conquer them, but you're recognizing who they are. And if you can compliment too, that's nice. We can see you're excelling at meeting your customers' growing demands for the latest in mobile phone technology. So a nice little factual compliment. You are excelling, so that's great. That's nice news to hear, and just a nice little positive way to start positive. There's other opening techniques though you can use in that first paragraph. You can always start with good news. If it turns out that it was multiple requests, you can always start with what you're willing to do. Like that's the good news part. Like if they ask for more credit and also fast shipping on a current order, Dear Miss Baylor, we'll be happy to provide fast shipping on your current order, and we'll get that done. And then transition to the other news. Okay? Or gratitude. Thank them for something. Thank you for inquiring about increasing your purchasing power. We're proud that you want to grow your business with us. Okay, so starting with gratitude like that can be a good way to start positive and to just show that you have goodwill and that you're not against them and all of that. Or you can do like a review technique. So mention materials that you reviewed for them. So you might start off by saying, we carefully reviewed your request for an increase, looking at both your credit and scores and purchase history. You know, we commend you for wanting to grow your company with us and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so a review. All of these techniques are things that you can include. Now, notice in the previous letter, they weren't all used. So these are all little tools that you can include that you think would be useful for you in this particular letter. They just weren't included in this one, but I gave you examples so you can see. Secondly, you have the explanation. So start with a neutral opening, build some goodwill, set the topic, transition to the explanation. So you're going to give concise and logical reasons leading up to the news. To ensure that we can keep our inventory ready for suppliers, we practice debt control. Our formula is to maintain at least a 2-to-1 ratio of current assets to current liabilities. Experience has taught us that, for the benefit of all concerned, credit should only be available to purchasers who meet that ratio. So notice here, right from the first paragraph, we transition into the reasons. To ensure that we can keep our inventory ready for suppliers, and you could even say ready for suppliers like you, if you wanted, we practice debt control. Then, a concise reason is given. Our formula is to maintain at least a 2-to-1 ratio of current assets to current liabilities. Experience has taught us that for benefit of all concerned. Okay, so you got your quick reason. Then, reader benefit. Experience has taught us for the benefit of all concerned, so I frame this as being good for you and for all. It's not just company policy, right? It's like, well, for the benefit of all of you and for everyone, we do X. Now, then we get to the bad news statement. The bad news statement gives a clear statement sandwiched between the positive opening and closing. So, because your ratio is 1.25 to 1, you are encouraged to make cash purchases and take advantage of the current 1% discount. So, we're essentially saying you are not at the 2-to-1 ratio. So instead, make cash purchases and take advantage of the current 1% discount because that's all that's currently available to you. So it's positioned in the explanation. That's the first thing. The bad news statement is not given its own paragraph or its own real estate. You try to sandwich it in the explanation so the reader has a lot of context when they learn it. What's also happening here is you have sort of an implied refusal. An implied refusal is where instead of saying no, you imply the no. Instead of saying no, we will not give you a credit increase, period. Okay? That's very direct. An implied refusal, you can say no by just implying it by the explanation and also the implication of it. Because your ratio is approximately 1.25 to 1, clearly you don't meet 2, but that's implied. And so therefore, continue to make cash purchases. So then the counter proposal is included. So not only do I not say no, I use the implied refusal, I then redirect them by telling them to make cash purchases and take advantage of the current 1% discount. So I'm not just telling them no, I'm also redirecting them so they can still achieve their goal of what they want. Here's another example of a bad news statement. This was a letter that rejects a company for a building site or for a property. Although the Bynum property was selected as the building site, nearness to the railroad was considered a plus for the Hampton property. So in the rejection, we're going to say Bynum property was selected, but we put it in the dependent clause here. So what's a dependent clause? A dependent clause is a sentence, sort of. It's a clause that has a subject and a verb that cannot stand on its own as a sentence. You cannot have a sentence that just goes, although the Bynum property was selected as the building site. You see, like, you need more. Like, okay, although what? Like, although what? So that's why it's a dependent clause. If you can sneak not sneak, but just like put the bad news statement in a dependent clause, that'll immediately move the bad news then to the actual positive. And then the positive was the nearness to the railroad was considered a plus for the Hampton property. Notice here also passive voice was used. So this would be a circumstance where passive voice might be okay. because you want to unhighlight agency. Although we did not select your property, we selected Brian property, you may not want to put a lot of blame, because what if it was one person that made that choice? Although John Smith did not select Brian property, like that might put too much blame on him. You can use passive voice to kind of spread it if you want. So it's up to you. If you're very anti-passive voice, then put in active voice. But this would be a case where I think passive voice would be okay. One of the few cases. And then everything is, once again, given in a positive frame, because we want to show that we thought about them, that we were concerned for them. It's not always the case that bad news is bad because it's not what they want. Sometimes bad news is hurtful and it's bad to the receiver because of the way it's delivered. It's delivered in a way where it seems like the reader wasn't cared about, the reader wasn't considered, the reader wasn't taken into account, their interests weren't thought of. The more you can convey that you thought of the reader, you considered them, you listened to them, you heard them, the better. Then lastly, you have the closing. In the closing, you want to give a clear statement sandwiched between the positive opening and the closing that just basically keeps it positive. It's a clear positive statement that you use. So, by continuing to supply your customers with timely merchandise, you should be able to improve the ratio. We welcome an opportunity to review your credit line again when that happens. You've been a loyal customer for over 2 years now, and we look forward to seeing your business thrive in the coming months. So what you have here is you accentuate the positive, so say something nice again. And here you're also being very forward thinking, because you're saying by continuing to supply your customers with timely merchandise, you should be able to improve the ratio, which will then mean later in the future, we will review your credit line again, and you probably will potentially get that line again. So next steps are once again included that are positive in nature, and we have a unifying close. You've been a loyal customer over 2 years now. We look forward to seeing your business thrive in the coming months. So we acknowledge at the beginning of the letter that your business is thriving, and in the close of the letter, we recognize it's thriving, and we look forward to growing with you in the future. So this was written for a customer, but definitely even your own employees, when you have to give them bad news, same ideas apply. But here's what you want to avoid when you have to write out bad news. First, you want to avoid cliches like those thoughtless trite statements. If we can be of further help, please do not hesitate to call or write. Thank you for your interest. Like, okay, so we kind of hear that all the time. And this, like, if we can be of further help, like, but you didn't help me by not giving me my credit increase. So how are you helping me? So you have to be careful about presumptive language there. Also, you want to avoid indeterminacy. So you remember in the bad example, that person apologized and I said, don't do that. Right, because we don't want to make it seem like this decision was indeterminate or we weren't confident in it, because if you do, if you give that indeterminacy, I might feel like as a reader, I can argue with this and that you might be persuadable away from it. And then you don't want to do that because then you get caught up in debates and in arguments and such. So we trust this explanation is satisfactory. No, that's gross. Like, you should have the confidence in your writing to know this explanation is satisfactory. So you don't need to say anything like that. And we don't need to continually highlight the harm that was done. So we don't want that either. And then lastly, you don't want to invite controversy. So some people will disagree with this, but you have to be careful about if you have any more questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to let us know. Because, oh yeah, they'll let you know, right? So you have to be careful about inviting discussion, debate. Probably a better example, this is our position. So our position, we will hold our position, because then like you're talking about positions and we can understand your position, but our position, we maintain our position of blah, 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 blah. That sounds like it's a debate. Like in debate, you establish positions and you defend and attack each other's position, right? We don't want to use debate language in a bad news letter. So here is the letter one more time without the heading and such, but you can see that it's 3 paragraphs. And once again, nothing longer than 5 lines. You can see where all the components are, and that's how you'd write something like this. So as a review, we asked, how do you write unfavorable letters? Use the inductive approach. Anytime you're going to have to give unfavorable information or decline an employee, unless it's one of the exceptions where the relationship's not at stake or it's something that's insignificant, you probably want to use the inductive approach. How do you write routine letters? Or goodwill letters? Continue to use the deductive approach. Thesis, explanation, close. And then lastly, what are business letters? We looked at what those are and what they're used for external communication and such. Now, what we haven't covered in so far, and what we'll cover next, is persuasive writing. Because change proposals, sales letters, requests for promotions, raise requests, cover letters, all of those are intending to persuade. So in the next lecture, we'll talk about that. See you then.